Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tuesday Tips for Parents of Teenagers here at Raising Remarkable Teenagers. And today, I am here by myself, and our guest today has had sort of an emergency, so she's not able to come on. However, she will be rearranging to come and talk to us about how she transformed from being a frustrated mom to a very connected and conscious mother. And but today, what I will do, I will go through some of the questions that I would usually ask our guests. And what I will do very, very consciously is answer these questions. For those of us who have not listened to this show before or this podcast before, however you're listening to it, I will go through it and tackle some of the points that I usually like to discuss with my guests. So one of the very first question I ask our guests is their view on intentional parenting. Now, most of you guys know that here at Raising Remarkable Teenagers, we are very big on being intentional. And here is why. Being intentional really is like the lifeline, the bloodline of our existence as parents. And you might think, oh, that's beyond board, Angela, for you to say that. But here is the thing. Imagine taking your breath every moment. You've got to do that for you to live the next minute. Being intentional is something very close to that, right? It is something you have to do, but you have to do it consciously. It is very important, but you have to do it consciously. I mean, most of us, when we take our breath, well, unless you're consciously meditating or thinking through your breath work, we are unconscious, where we breathe unconsciously. However, intentional parenting requires that we breathe in consciously. And I don't mean breath. It's about making minute by minute decisions that are conscious. And that's why I say it really is like breath, because when we don't take the breath, what do you think is likely to happen? Well, I mean, we know that there's going to be constriction of life, right? And that's what happens when we are not intentional parents. What happens is we are parenting, we are going through the motion. What's driving us is everything, all the beliefs that we have ever known, how we were parented from the past, we bring it through without taking a moment to ask ourselves, why am I doing this? How is this beneficial? So being an intentional parent is constantly having those pit stops to ask yourself, why am I doing this? How is this taking me to the direction of my goal and my dream? And that's where is it taking you in relation to your vision with how you parent your kid? And one of the things we do every year here at Raising Remarkable Teenagers is every January, we have what we call a visioning session. And this is where we implore parents to actually consciously sit down and plan how they want their relationships with their teenagers to be. Now, most people say, oh, you can't plan for another person. It is true. You can't plan for another person, but you can plan for yourself. And this is what I know for sure. When we begin to work on ourselves as influencers in our young people's lives, we are able to influence them in the way they go. Again, remember, especially when we're parenting teenagers, it is more of influence and partnering. We mostly leave behind the parenting where we used to ask them to do things and they did them, when they used to just know what to do, and that falls away. But we move to a different section of life where we have to influence our young people, and they have to want to listen to us. And remember, there are so many voices around. So how do we as parents make ourselves stand out as the one that influences them, as the one that they actually want to listen to? And this comes with being intentional. So when I talk about intentional, I mean literally making a decision that this is the person I'm going to be, this is the leader I'm going to be, and this is the influencer I'm going to be. Now, you know that an influential leader needs to have certain ways of being, and as you can hear, I don't want you to hear what I'm not saying. It is mostly not what we do, it's who we are that influences our young people. Now, when people join our mentoring program, we go through what we call the vibrational levels of influence. Most parents are not intentional at all. I mean, and I can say that for sure, because even I fall from grace so many times, right? But there is something about knowing the importance of being intentional, because even when you fall, you are quick to get back. I mean, yesterday I shared a post on social media, especially on my LinkedIn side of social media, that went really viral. And what it showed was this, I wish I could share it here actually, was how many of us just go through the motions, and then there is this system. So we are walking onto the system, and because we haven't got a vision, you don't know where you're going, you reach a cliff edge and you drop. And that's how many people are living their lives. And that's how we are parenting as well. And almost forcing our kids to go through the same, because without a vision, you know, when it says without a vision, my people perish, that may sound like a very good Bible verse, but even in today's life, in today's system, you have people who are following systems. You don't even know why you're following. You're just following because someone is in front of you, but you don't know what's here. And then when you get here, you drop into the ocean. It's a cliff, right? But when you are an intentional parent, because you know where you're going, your eyes are set on there, and you know when you're not going there. For example, if you decide I'm going to be a kind person, being kind is not something you decide yesterday and then that's it. It's an action thing. You have to constantly be kind. So in how you behave, in what you do, in what you say towards your teenager, you're thinking kindness. So most people will say, oh, I will die for my kids. I will die for my kids, especially us mothers. But the truth is, our kids don't need us dead. They don't need us to die for them. They need us to live for them. And how do we live? Let's go back to by being intentional about what we do, by being intentional about how we relate with them, how we connect with them, how we communicate with them. Being intentional is so crucial. It's so crucial that, you know, many of us, many of the parents I get to see, by the time they're coming to work with me, they're like, I don't even know what to do. And obviously, this is not a space of shame or blame, or why didn't you do this and why did you do that? That's not what we do here. We start by visioning. It doesn't matter what you've done wrong or right in the past. That's not what we do. What we do is get back on the drawing board and decide, so where do I want to go? Begin to envision. And when you begin to envision, have that vision of, who do I see myself being? And therefore, how do I see my relationship with my kid? Right? And you can include anything in all those. And remember, once we become the influencers that we want to be to our kids, we don't have to force them to do anything. We don't have to force them to do anything. You guys know I teach the 5 habits of highly effective teenagers. And this is what happens when young people learn those 5 habits. And most of you know the 5 habits include being respectful, being responsible, being resilient, being robust, and being radiant. Now, when our young people learn these 5 habits, you don't have to follow them about doing their homework. You don't have to follow them about doing their rooms, looking after themselves. You don't have to you don't have to chase after them to do anything. Why? Because it's like let's take the example of a plane, right? The whole plane, the whole huge plane can be controlled by that little, whatever, I can't remember what it's called. I think it's a cockpit there, the one that controls everything, and the little the pilot and the autopilot thing, right? That little thing that controls it, right? And this is when we are talking about the 5 habits, it's about working on that. Then when you work on that, you don't have to go on the sides and try to move the wings and try to move the wheels and try to move everything else, which is what most of us do. We struggle with that because we have omitted from working on those 5 habits. Because once we work on those 5 habits, again, it takes you not only knowing what those 5 habits are, but also being intentional about learning them. And on top of that, being intentional about teaching your kid. And when it comes to teaching our young people, in fact, the other day I was talking to the BBC and they asked me about mentoring. And as you guys know, I talk about the 3 M's of influence, right? And for me, without a doubt, from research and what else has worked, if you're going, or if I'm going, if any of us are going to be influencers for our kids, for our teenagers especially, you know, the little ones, for those of us with the little ones, right? Oh, you can tell them to do this, they'll do it. They don't even, they haven't got the wherewithal to start asking, why am I doing this? They're just blindly obeying. Oh, mommy says this, I do this, mommy. But when they get to teenage years, they're beginning to separate themselves from us. They're beginning to see themselves as their own entity. And they're beginning to question, why? Why should I do this? Why should I? And telling them, because mama says that, or because papa says that, that's not enough. In fact, that's bad. And here it's why it's bad. If you train your kids to do things just because you said, what you're training them is to, when they go out in the world, they don't learn how to reason, to question, to be rational. They just do things because because the person said, because that's what they learned to do. They learned to blindly obey. And it might sound like a nice thing that the little kid does everything they're told to do. And that's why some of us parents of teenagers find it hard when kids, our teenagers argue with us. In fact, if your kid is not arguing with you, you should be very afraid. You should ask yourself, if your kid is not arguing and asking why, ask yourself, where have I trained my kid blind obedience? Because our kids should not be parrots, just regurgitating what we have said or just repeating what we have said. We want to be able to empower them to ask questions, because when they go out in the world and someone tells them to do this or do that and do that, that's how most people get abused and used and abused and misused. Why? Because they don't ask the questions, or they don't have the mental capacity to evaluate, to ask questions. Why am I being asked to do this? Why am I being asked to engage in this, right? So it's very important. In fact, all of us should intentionally encourage our young people to ask these questions, and where best for them to practice than home. So instead of shushing them away or saying they're difficult because they're asking questions, encourage those questions. Say to them, for example, your kid, and sometimes we know teenagers can argue over everything and anything, right? But when they argue, lean in and listen and say to them, oh, tell me more about that. Why do you think that should be like this and not like this? Encourage those conversations for change, those conversations that help them develop their reasoning capacity, those conversations that help them question things. That way, you are helping grow an ego that will shatter territories. And in doing that, you're avoiding just having a parrot that just parrots what you say, but repeats what people say. They don't even know why they're saying what they're saying, but they are saying it. You guys have had parrots. Parrots will say, oh, I am, if you tell it to say, I am okay, it will say, I am okay. If you ask it why, it doesn't know. You can teach it anything and it will just parrot it. But that's not what we want. We want our kids to be eagles. We want our kids to have strong mental capacity to be able to decide, whoa, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go do this. I need support for this. I need support for this. And for example, when they get pulled into things that are not exactly good, they're able to question. One of the, in the 5 habits of highly effective teenagers, one of the R's is I talked about is robust, right? It's the 4th one that I talk about. I talk about respectful. I talk about responsible. I talk about resilient. I talk about robust. And then I talk about radiant. So robust. These are values, right? Values that make your kid who they are. Those reasoning capacities that make them ask questions. And that's, instead of, like I said earlier, instead of thinking, oh, this one's problematic because they're always saying, they're always asking questions, they're always refuting what I'm saying, help them to strengthen that part of them. And then in doing that, show them it is okay to say no, but say it kindly, right? I mean, most of you know that I have a young person here. She's 16, and when people talk about strong-willed, oh, I am right there with them, with a strong-willed young person. Because talk about someone who has a mind of their own. Oh boy, does she have a mind of their own. But this is what I have been encouraging that from ever since she was young. Now, as she grows into her teenage years, what we are doing now is, yes, supporting that, but then reminding her, it is okay for you to tell me that my point doesn't make sense without attacking me as a person, right? For example, there is a difference between saying, you don't know what you're talking about. I mean, and kids sometimes will tell you, you don't know what you're talking about. How can you help them to reframe that instead of attacking you as a person, like you don't know what you're talking about? What about you say, okay, what about you tell me that my point does not make sense? That way, you're talking about my point, which does not make sense, or my point, which you think is not valid, without telling me that I don't know what I'm talking about. Do you see the difference? Do you see the difference? There is a difference, and that's what we can do with our young people. Intentional, instead, again, this is where being intentional comes in, right? Most of us, especially most people from my background, when a kid responds to you, the first thing you want to think is, oh, you shouldn't be speaking to me like that. You shouldn't be answering me. You shouldn't be doing all this. You shouldn't be arguing with me, right? But instead of doing that, what if we said, okay, what about if you said it this way, right? If you said it this way, for example, you call your kid and maybe they are doing something else and they say, wait, or I don't want to come, or sometimes they say, what, right? And these are our opportunities to say, what about you say to me, hold on for 5 minutes or 10 minutes? Yeah, we help them to be able to communicate their feelings, their thoughts, yeah, without violating other people and without violating them, right? So when we call our kids, right, remember that they're having their own little life, they're doing their own thing, right? And some of us, sometimes we expect them to spring up and come. It's like they were doing nothing. And that for me is a bit disrespectful, because this young person is possibly in the middle of doing something, but then we expect when we call, they spring up and leave everything they're doing. I think you wouldn't want someone to do that to you, right? So it's our opportunities to train them to say, okay, Mom, can you hold on for 10 minutes? Or can you hold for 2 minutes, right? Instead of saying what? Instead of saying what about you tell me, okay, Mother, can you hold on for a minute? I'm in the middle of doing something, or I'm in the middle of playing a game, I'm in the middle of watching something, right? And that respect comes on both ways. I know we do cross a little bit, because sometimes you're thinking, what I'm calling you for is more important than what you're doing. And I think, again, none of us, where we work, where we in the community, you wouldn't want someone to treat you like that. So why is it that we think it's okay for us to treat our kids like that? Because what we are doing, we are training them to have that power imbalance, right? We are trained, and I remember watching Horton one time, and there is that thing of you treat people as less than because they are smaller and younger, but then unfortunately they learn to do that to whoever else is that, and that's really not humanity, right? And I'm not saying we never, there are times when I say, let's go. For example, if it's a time we had planned to go, this time I say, let's go, and we decide we need to go. Don't ask me, don't tell me 5 minutes, 10 minutes. We had decided we are going at that time. I'm talking about when we sometimes decide this needs to be done, and we call them straight away and expect things to be done straight away. I think it's very important, very, very important for us to consider that this person is in the middle of doing something, and to be respectful about it. And in the same breath, teach them to how to respond, because chances are when you call them, maybe when they're in the middle of watching something, they'll get angry, or they'll say what, instead of answering yes, they'll say what. So that's when we say to them, you know, if I have distracted you, of course you have the right to tell me that I've distracted you, but you can tell me nicely. It's about coaching them to be kind, coaching them to be loving, coaching them to be able to have these cohesive relationships. That's what it is about, right? So when I talk about being intentional, it's knowing these things. And as you guys know, we talk a lot here about bursting a lot of beliefs, right? In just that conversation I've had, we've busted a lot of beliefs, you know, like kids should spring up as soon as we call them. No, I don't think so, right? If you are in the middle of doing something, you just don't leave it and move because someone has called you. There is always that little adjustment time, yeah? And you want someone to respect it. You want someone to respect the space or what you are doing. And that is what life is all about. And where best for our kids to practice that than at home? Because here's the thing, we as parents have them for quite a long time, especially when they're in adolescent years. So we're talking about from 9 years old to let's say about 24 years old, and that it's a long period of time. And this is their practice run. This is their practice run for how they will live in the big, wide world. And what we want is for us to think in terms of these 5 habits constantly, again, being intentional. You're always thinking what I'm doing, what I'm saying, how I'm relating with this kid. Is it helping them to be more responsible? Is it helping them to be more respectful? Is it helping them to be more resilient? Is it helping them to be more robust? Is it helping them to be radiant? So we are constant. That again is being intentional. You're so conscious about, and this doesn't mean you're parenting in fear. It's not about parenting in fear, because again, what we talk here at Raising Remarkable Teenagers, we have what we call the levels of vibrations, which include the levels of influence, right? It starts from shame and guilt are at the bottom. And many parents are parenting in shame, in guilt, maybe what you didn't do and what you did do, or some of it is our own, the way we were parented. In fact, the other day I shared about suppression and denial, right? And that was in conjunction with shouting at our kids and smacking them and just not being very nice. And for some people, the reason they continue to do that is because that's what was done for them and to them. They know that it is not right. We all know that it's not right. I remember feeling, this is not right. This is not right. For me, when you try to speak with your parents, or you were meant to feel insignificant, yeah? And your voice didn't matter. You didn't matter, right? You were there. In fact, they used to say that we were there to be seen and not to be heard. But I even doubt that we were there to be even seen, because the disregard of kids was just, it was on another level, right? It was just on another level. It was, sometimes you even wondered, why did the parents give birth to these kids? What for? Again, it was something, because that's what happens when people grow older. You get children for the next generation. But we need to be more conscious than that. We need to rise a little bit higher from the level of beasts, to be honest, because animals are the ones who just give birth for the sake of propagating the next generation. We, as parents, we have kids. We have our kids so that life can continue to propagate itself, but at the same time, so they can go and do bigger things than even what we have done. I mean, that for me is my joy, to be able to see my daughter do even better and more things, and even grander things, bigger dreams than I have achieved in my lifetime, right? In fact, for those of us who are from the Christian background, we have the good example of Jesus Christ. While he lived in this world, he did major stuff, he did great things and all that. And then what did he say? Greater things than even this shall you do, because I'm going to the Father, right? That is the kind of thinking. Again, this is the kind of thinking I want us as intentional parents to have, right? So that when we are speaking to our kids, we are speaking life, we are speaking growth, we are speaking greatness, right? And again, that is another thing we need to be intentional about. Most of our generations were brought up with crazy, crazy put downs, crazy sarcasms, crazy, it's just crazy. So most of us have really had to really work and cleanse that negativity from our system to be able to be where we are, right? And what I said in that thing, but then we also have another group of parents who are in denial and suppression. Why? Because we cannot say that our parents did something wrong. Because again, it is taboo to say that your parents did something wrong. But we have to be clear and clean about it. I'm not saying that my parents were bad. You're just saying they did something wrong. This is again where we separate behavior and the person, right? So I'm saying they did things that were wrong, and they only acted at the level of their understanding. So I don't have any bad feelings about it. I know that they behaved like that because that's all they knew at that time. But it's up to me, as now in my position as a leader, to decide, how am I going to do it differently? And that's what being an intentional parent is. How am I going to do it differently? Is there any baggage? Are there any beliefs, any baggages that I'm carrying along just because it happened to me, just because it was done to me, just to do? And people say, oh, I was shouted at, I was slapped, and I turned out fine. No, you did not turn out fine. No, you did not turn out fine, because hurting people hurt others. That's the problem. You bleed on other people, and sometimes you bleed on your kids. There's a lot of things that they do, and we bleed on them. Why? Because we never truly healed. And it's okay to say, yes, this is how I was treated. I didn't like it. It was not nice. And I'm not saying that you hold it against anyone, because again, holding those negative feelings about people, whether it be our parents or anyone else, it's toxic to our own bodies, it's toxic to our brain, it's toxic to our bodies. And sometimes when you hear people saying, oh, I turned out okay, but then I want to ask you, how many illnesses have you got that you can't explain? And these are some of the things we call psychosomatic disorders, you know, things that happened to us when we were younger, trauma. And because we suppressed it, we denied it because it was too much, then we begin to have we begin to have skin problems that we can't explain. Even the doctors can't explain. We begin to have headaches. We begin to have all sorts of things that they're chronic. These, have you ever considered, maybe I need a cleansing? Like some people call it healing the inner child, right? Heal that inner child, and a lot of these illnesses disappear, right? So anyway, today it's not about talking all those things, right? And I know, gosh, I said I would be just about half an hour because our guest is not here, but I want to talk about our upcoming workshop, and that's leadership skills and strategies for parenting teenagers today. And some of the strategies I'm going to be covering include, and if you have a pen and paper, please, I would like you to write this, because this is going to be good. And I want you to write the acronym FAC. So that's FAC. And now the F, next to F, I want you to, I wish I'd thought about sharing my slides actually, but again, anyway, let's just go with this. I want you to think about flexibility, and then fluidity, and then I want you to write faith. As you all know, when I talk about faith here, we're not talking about religion at all. What we are talking about is being able to see beyond what we see, being able to believe beyond circumstances. As a matter of fact, the other day, again, I shared a pictograph on the difference between facts and truth, right? And what I'll do actually, I'll just below this video, and for those who are just listening, take some time to download this when you can. It's the difference between facts and truth. So I'm going to be talking in the workshop. I'm going to be talking about flexibility, fluidity, and faith, right? And then the A is awareness, authenticity, and authority, right? So what we're going to be talking about is being aware, because without being aware, you're in the dark. Without awareness, there's ignorance. So we're going to be talking about how do we become aware. And again, in our mentoring program, we talk about levels of awareness, levels of awareness. And you never, ever get to know everything. There's always something new you learn every day. And that's the good thing about being in this community, because in our conversations, and you guys know I like to have these conversations for change and conversations that matter and tough conversations, because when you and I have this conversation, a lot of things come up. In fact, even when I'm having this conversation with you, my mind is expanding, and my executive function, which is the front part of my brain, is seeking everywhere, trying to tag little things of, okay, what do we know? What do we know? What can we learn? What can we learn? right? So we're going to be talking about awareness, and then we will be talking about authenticity of you as a leader, of you as a parent, and then we're going to be talking about authority. And when we talk about authority, this does not mean that you are lording over anyone. It's the authority that you, as you grow as a person, command over everything that's about you, and self-leadership, which is authority over self, being able to take charge of your thinking, being able to take charge of your emotions, being able to take charge of your of what's happening, even of your dreams, being able to take charge of your actions. That's the authority we are talking about, because we know self-leadership is the highest, or self-governance is the highest form of governance. We cannot parent successfully when we ourselves have no self-leadership in our own lives. And unfortunately, most of us attempt to do it. In fact, the other day I was listening to someone who said something extremely profound, and they said, before you start driving, most of us go for driving lessons, and then we go for the test, and then we pass, and then we go on the road and all that. Why is it that before we have our kids, as we parent, we don't put the same amount of wanting to be aware, wanting to know these strategies, wanting to know, to have these skills, to be able to be on the driving seat of our young people's lives, to help them? Why is it that we don't put the same effort? And again, remember earlier I said, as human beings, we have to rise up that notch, right? We're just not like the animal kingdom, right? Our job is to just get kids and then go through the motions. We have to do differently. We have to do something different. I usually tell my community that, especially parenting teenagers, oh, now this is championship level parenting. Why? We cannot play the same backyard game that we played. We have to rise to a championship level, and that involves improving our skills, improving the strategies, moving away from just being a parent to being a partner, because it's partnering. We have kids, our teenage kids, they are beginning to know they own their bodies, right? So you don't demand what they wear or what they don't wear. You have to work in partnership. Help them to understand that this looks good on you. This is what. Yeah. And then some of them are beginning to have piercings or drawings on themselves. That they are beginning to take charge of their own bodies, and we have almost no control over them unless you practically hold the kid and put them down, which again, if you do that, they know the numbers to call, right? And most of you say, oh, I let them do it. Well, is that really what you want to do? What about if we develop such a relationship that we are able to have these conversations and tell them, of course, it's your body. Of course, it's up to you. This is my recommendation. This is what I feel or I think. And I'll tell you what, our young people are self-preserving. And what do I mean by this? When we have conversations with them, they will come up to a more positive solution than when we force things on them. In fact, when we force things on them, they go and rebel. Why? They want to take charge quickly without thinking. But when we help them process what they are thinking and then combine it with our support, they most often come to conclusions that we could never have even seen coming, right? So anyway, I was talking about the leadership skills that we are going to be talking about. So I've talked about the FAC, which is flexibility, fluidity, and faith. And then the A is going to be awareness, authenticity, and also authority. And then the C is going to be about connection and communication and celebrating. So these C's, I have found them to be absolutely influential. Connection, communication, then it's communication that connects, and then celebrations. And what do I mean by celebration? Celebrating our young people is a very, very powerful strategy. And most parents don't even know this, that I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in the sessions in our workshops, and that the teenager's brain, the reward part of it gets heightened during teenage years. And we as parents, intentional parents, we want to be able to tap into that. Because if we can tap into praise, into praising our young people, and I'm not talking about, you know when they were little, you say, oh, good girl, good thing, well done. That's not what we're talking about, because when they get to teenage years, that embarrasses them. They're like, go away, I don't want to hear that, or you're being OTT, or they tell you you're being over the top and all that. We're talking about factual praise. Factual praise. And before we finish, because we are coming to the top of the hour, I want to again just repeat the strategies and the skills we're going to be talking about and during the leadership strategies for parenting teenagers today. And that FAC, and that's being flexible, fluid, and having faith as a parent. And then we're going to be talking about awareness, authenticity, and authority. And then we're going to be talking about connection, communication, and celebration. And as always, you guys know, every session, I leave all of you viewers and listeners with practical tips that you can use today, because I talk a lot about action on the information so that we can get transformation. So today, I'm going to talk about the 80-20 rule, which is something most of you have heard me talk about, especially when we are dealing with our teenagers. What is the 80-20 rule? The 80-20 rule says, before you ask your teenager to do the one thing, praise them for 4 things. Remember, I talked about celebration? Celebrate them for 4 things. Praise them for 4 things before you ask them to do one thing. Now, it might sound like hard work, but I'll show you how well this works, right? I just said to you that during teenage years, they have that part of the brain that gets heightened. It's called the striatum. And what happens is that part of the brain loves rewards. What is praise? Praise is a reward. So here is how it works. So, for example, you walk into their room, it's a dark room, it's messy, it's probably even stinky. Let that not be the first thing you ask them to sort out, even though it's a thing you want them to sort out. You probably want to first ask them to open the shutters, to open the curtains. Don't go there. Stand there. Look for 4 things you can celebrate them for. Look for 4 things you can praise them for before you ask them to do the one thing. You might be saying, oh, that is hard work. Of course. Training our young people to do these things can be hard work, and it can feel like hard work. But when you do that, what you're doing is you're celebrating them for who they are. So you're praising them for 4 things. And then another thing happens when we do that. Remember I said to you that part of the brain? When it feels happy, yeah? When it feels rewarded, it opens up and it's receptive. So what happens when you ask them to do the one thing? They're more receptive. They're more likely to do it. They're less likely to fight you. So that's the one tip. So think about it. Before you ask them to do the one thing, ask yourself, how can I praise them for 4 things? Try it. Try it this week. It works. It still works for me. It still works for me. It's a very powerful strategy, and it worked for many, many parents. And unfortunately, it looks like as our kids grow older, we find it harder to praise them, even though we know that praise works, right? We just have to adjust so that the praise is factual. So you're not telling them, you're the most beautiful kid in the whole world. You know, it's not crazy stuff like that. We're talking about factual. Look at, pick like whatever. I noticed your earring. You look good, or something. That's something that they cannot argue or haggle with, right? Even in that room, look for something that looks okay and mention it, right? Look for, even talk about something that they have achieved in the past. Things like those. So anyway, think about the 80-20 rule. Before you ask them to do the one thing, praise them for 4 things. Say, thank you so much. Gosh, we've ended up doing a whole hour of this. And thank you so much for watching this here at Raising Remarkable Teenagers. Today, Tuesday Tips for Parents of Teens. My name is Angela Karanja. I am an adolescent psychologist and parenting teenagers expert here at Raising Remarkable Teenagers, and I'm the founder of Raising Remarkable Teenagers. And until our next session, I'm going to say bye-bye for now. Remember, take action on that information so that you can get the transformation. I'll see you in the next session. Bye-bye now.